Hi, I'm Sarah.
I'm Rena.
And welcome to Biopic, a podcast story. Today, we will be doing the film The Conqueror. Rena, any trigger warnings for this movie?
This movie contains animal abuse, misogyny, brown face, red face, especially yellow face, racism, cancer, nuclear waste. What else can you think of?
Misogyny's a pretty big tent that covers a lot of the issues with this film. But I think that about covers it.
And spoiler warning, we will spoil The Conqueror, which was made in 1956 about events that happened about 800 years ago. And we may also spoil other works of narrative art that are not The Conqueror. So consider yourself warned.
Can you spoil a movie that has nothing to do with the actual events that took place in the movie or in the real world, though? Like, can we call that spoiling?
They got the names right if the story is all off. But yeah, that is an interesting point you bring up. So Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about The Conqueror and about Genghis Khan?
Of course. So from our friends over at Wikipedia, The Conqueror is a 1956 American epic historical drama film directed by Dick Powell and written by Oscar Millard. It stars John Wayne, that's right, as the Mongol conqueror Genghis Khan, and co-stars Susan Hayward, Agnes Moorehead, and Pedro Armendariz. Produced by entrepreneur Howard Hughes, the film was principally shot near St. George, Utah. The role of Genghis Khan was originally written for Marlon Brando, but Brando later backed out of the role. I just wanted to add that piece of trivia because 1970 era Marlon Brando would have done this just to troll John Wayne, and it would have been beautiful. A little bit more about Genghis Khan. He was the founder and the first Khan of the Mongol Empire, which he ruled from 1206 until his death in 1227. All that AD, if it matters. It later became the largest contiguous empire in history. After spending most of his life uniting the Mongol tribes, he launched a series of military campaigns conquering large parts of China and Central Asia. Also important, just to our rating system, no eyewitness description or contemporaneous depiction of Genghis Khan survives. So he may have looked like John Wayne. We don't actually know.
Sometimes his name is pronounced Genghis Khan. We'll just say it interchangeably, however we feel like saying it, because we're not sure.
Yeah. This movie isn't sure about so many things.
Here are some things to know about the fustercluck that is The Conqueror. I've read 3 sources for this that I'll be reading from subsequently while we unpack. One is John Wayne Was Here by Roland Shafley, John Wayne, The Man Behind the Myth by Michael Munn, and Killing John Wayne, The Making of the Conqueror by Ryan DeWilligan.
I read a listicle on history.com, and I think that I know more about Genghis Khan than the makers of this film.
Years ago, I listened to and really loved Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcasts on the Mongols, which I must have listened to about 4 or 5 times just because it was such a brutal world that it was just fascinating to me. And because the Mongols were so hardcore and anything where they were quoted directly was so blunt. And I've read various books on them over the years. I learned that if you are Chinese, Genghis Khan was a very bad dude who killed millions and millions of Chinese people.
He has a body count of 50 million estimated.
Really?
Yes, which makes this movie, and you'll hear it as we get into it, all the more weird because of the tone of it, and makes it an even more bizarre relic of history, and just makes it really clear that like no one knew what they were doing in the making of this movie, because 50 million body count is real dark.
50 million? You're sure of that?
That was an estimate. And listen, you're the history person on this podcast. I'm the person who Googles it for 5 minutes, so I could have that wrong, but he was a bad dude.
He was a bad dude, especially if you're Chinese. There's a note that I have on the dialogue. Because they felt that it needed to sound 12th century, the dialogue is written in some bizarre cross between a pidgin imitation of 17th century and archaic English drama D-listers who maybe heard of the Globe Theatre but never set foot there, and wouldn't know Chaucer if John of Gaunt personally whacked them on the head with a multi-volume set, and a crude facsimile of how people speaking English as a second or third language may awkwardly rearrange nouns, adjectives, verbs, and articles because their natural speech pattern follows a different arrangement, or because their first language doesn't have articles. This leads to zingers such as, "Oh, brave suitor, would you desert your bride unkissed?" And, "Kumlik's daughter, spawn of evil, let your slaves have their sport with her. I will not have her within our tents."
It's interesting because in the time we're in right now, there's a lot of concern about Chat GPT and AI generated language. And so much of this movie feels like it was something that was fed into and spat back out by a bot, or people who were like machines that maybe had interacted with humans at some point were just doing their best to pick stuff up. The language is crazy. Rena, I would love if you could take us through a little bit of the research that you so carefully did around the making of this film, because its existence is a weird miracle. It's a weird word to use too, because it's all so rotten to the very core of its being, but it shouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm. Sure. From John Wayne, the man behind the myth, Michael Munn writes about how this movie came to be. When they asked John Wayne about it, he says, "I still don't know to this day what Howard," that's Howard Hughes, "I still don't know to this day what Howard had in mind for me, but I had a meeting at RKO at an office in which Dick Powell was ensconced, and I saw a treatment lying around for something called the Conqueror. I took a cursory look at it and thought, this might be interesting. I kind of liked it. Thought it would be something different, playing Genghis Khan. It was just like a Western, only with different costumes. Turned out Dick Powell was going to direct it, so I told him I'd like to do The Conqueror. I kind of took him by surprise, and he said, 'Are you serious?' I said, 'Sure, why not?' So he said, 'Okay,' and we shook hands on it. What I didn't know was that the full screenplay had been written by Oscar Millard for Marlon Brando, and it had a certain kind of style to it, which would have been fine for Brando, but for me, I thought, oh shit. Turned out that Fox wouldn't let Brando do it, so I guess Dick Powell thought that John Wayne might just pull in the crowds. My big mistake was I didn't actually read the script until we got to our location in Utah. I got used to getting interested in pictures from listening to the directors tell the story. Hawks could do that, so could Ford, and so could Wellman. I had all this terrible dialogue, which I'm not convinced even Brando could have handled. I got on the phone to Oscar Millard and said, "You gotta do something with this dialogue. I can't say those lines." He said, "You should have said so before. I can't rewrite the entire script now. You see, even John Wayne makes mistakes." And that was one of my biggest. For a start, Dick Powell had never directed before, but I figured every new director needs their first one to cut their teeth on. And he was such a nice guy that when I could see he was really over his head, I tried to be helpful without coming on too strong, which I admit I have a habit of doing. I just barged right in there. "Hold it a minute, you're telling me you're putting the camera there?" That's what I'm like. But on this picture, I had enough to contend with trying to get to grips with that goddamn dialogue. So we had a less than talented director who just happened to be a terrific guy, and we had a script that was written for Brando, but was being spoken by Duke Wayne. And it was just a fucking disaster.
Can I just jump in here for a sec?
Sure, Sarah. Let's unpack this.
First of all, I so deeply abhor John Wayne. He is a wife beater. He is an abusive alcoholic who was cruel to so many of the people around him. He was a draft dodger who then hid behind the flag and encouraged people to go to war like a chicken hawk during Vietnam. He's garbage. He's a terrible human being. Or was a terrible human being. I have no love in my heart for that man. I get it. He made a couple of really strong movies with John Ford, who is also an abusive alcoholic. I get it. Like, I get the legend. But he's such trash. And of course, he had the ego where he just figured, like, why should I even bother reading the script? I dislike him so intensely. And that's my piece on that. Also, that was him talking about himself in the third person, right?
I believe so, Sarah. And the most trenchant detail here was he didn't read the script before showing up to film the movie. He didn't even have his people read the script. He was just like, oh, directors explain these things to me. I think the people around Marlon Brando, if they saw this thing, would have said no. No wonder it was like sitting in a pile.
There's a world where I would be interested in seeing Marlon Brando's interpretation of this, because Marlon Brando, as I said, was like an amazing troll. He won that one Oscar for On the Waterfront, and then he said, I hate it here. I'm going to just be a troll for the rest of my career. And I kind of love that. But that said, I'm also glad that Marlon Brando did not go out into the nuclear wasteland of making this film, which I think we should also talk about, because that is a big old elephant in the room.
We will. One of the other actors, Lee Van Cleef, said about John Wayne, he was never less than professional, although he was clearly unhappy with some of the decisions that Dick Powell made. The thing is, when he complained about something, and he never did it belligerently, he was always right. He knew as much about making movies as anyone. He was in trouble because of the part and because of the director. But to give Powell his due, no director could have pulled that one off.
No, certainly not with the conditions that they were working with.
When asked what the message was in The Conqueror, John Wayne said, the message is, don't make an ass of yourself by trying to play parts you're not suited to. But I didn't learn that lesson. I still manage to make an ass of myself every now and then. Amen.
I mean, really neat little piece of trivia I picked up about Genghis Khan in one of the listicles that I read. He liked to hire his former rivals. So he has a little something in common with one Abraham Lincoln, as documented by Doris Kearns Goodwin. Didn't think I was going to make that connection, but here we are.
Another fun bit of trivia, The Conqueror was one of the movies that Howard Hughes watched. It was one of the movies that Howard Hughes later watched on repeat while sitting naked in the crazy room. It's estimated he watched it like 150 times. And when I realized going into this recording that it had been a month since I had watched the film and taken notes on it, I thought, well, I need to get present with this. So I did rewatch portions of it toward the beginning. But in advance of that, I had a mani-pedi to manifest not turning into Howard Hughes.
That was a good call. Also, I cannot believe you watched this, even part of this, a second time. And I cannot believe he watched this movie over 100 times. I watched it in 7 to 10 minute increments over a 2-week time period because it was so unbearable. And my mind kept drifting into other things during the film because it was just so bad and so painfully stilted and just weird. So I kept kind of thinking about I'm not especially pleased with the kind of person that Conqueror revealed me to be. This movie was a huge hit when it came, or not a huge hit when it came out. It did okay. And that leads me to assume that audiences in the 1950s were profoundly stupid and uncurious and anti-art and knew nothing about history. And that's not very nice of me. I get it was quasi-successful because people are dumb. Second, I don't even know what lens to view this film through, because it is absolutely not a story about Genghis Khan. It bears no resemblance to this period in history, any of the details about that except the mustache. It's just so gallingly disrespectful of the truth and of history and every aspect of history, right down to the fabrics that they're wearing. It's a disaster. It is a disaster. And as I said, a weird miracle. To get a movie this bad through all of the machinery of Hollywood and get it onto the screen is insane.
When you start watching, one of the first titles that rolls over is a Howard Hughes production, and that's when you know you're in for it. But it notes on his fandom that this was one of 3 films that Howard Hughes liked to watch on repeat. It notes the 3rd film, his staff insists Hughes requested to be played at least 150 times, was The Conqueror. He called the film his own personal favorite, allegedly masturbating to the picture until he grew too weak to do so. Some claimed John Wayne's rippling portrayal appealed to his long-hidden homosexual side. Others suggested his self-absorption knew no limits. A few insisted he was just absolutely in awe of the might and power of Genghis Khan. This is from The Making of the Conqueror by Ryan Wheatdewilligan, and I'm sorry for what I do to his name. I think it's Dutch.
What the hell am I supposed to say to that? How do I respond to Howard Hughes watching this movie and jerking off to it until he was too weak to do so? What do I do? What do I do with that?
They barely hinted at that in The Aviator.
I understand why they barely hinted at it in The Aviator. Like the way that his life comes down in that movie is abject enough without that. But man, should I just start talking about the opening crawl?
Well, there's one more thing about this movie. This movie, The Conqueror, starring John Wayne, caused cancer because the filming location in Utah was, I believe, about 137 miles downwind from a nuclear test site. And I think the figure was that out of about 200 people in the cast and crew, 91 of them got cancer. In John Wayne Was Here by Roland Shafley, it describes more A-bombs were detonated there than anywhere else in the world. St. George inhabitants were told they had nothing to fear. Residents said they could even see the mushroom clouds. The roll of thunder took 18 minutes to reach them. The bomb, codenamed Harry, a 32-kiloton shot, detonated on May 19, 1953. Inhabitants renamed it Dirty Harry. Almost all of them were larger than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The Wayne movie was made less than a year later. Although no bombs were tested during the filming, radioactivity from previous blasts probably lingered in Snow Canyon. The tests certainly weren't kept secret. Nobody worried about radiation. There was no concern. Wayne took his sons on an excursion into the desert, using a Geiger counter to measure radioactivity. To make matters worse, the company took truckloads of the red sands back to RKO to match interior shots, probably exposing the actors to fallout once more.
The only way this movie could be more terrible is if you saw a mushroom cloud going off in the background. That's so terrible. It's so terrible, and I shouldn't be laughing. But I don't know what else to do. It's awful, and it's an awful postscript for this movie. And I think Howard Hughes tried to buy up all the copies of this movie.
About Howard Hughes buying up all the copies of this, again, from John Wayne Was Here. The Conqueror was one of the last film Howard Hughes ever produced. After he sold RKO, one of the big 5 studios of Hollywood's golden age ceased to exist. Desilu Productions then purchased the physical lots for $6.1 million. That's how it becomes possible to spot Wayne's Genghis Khan costume on a Klingon in a Star Trek episode. Hughes sold the rights to 700 films in the RKO vault for $25 million. A few years later, he bought 2 of them back for the unbelievable sum of $12 million, Jet Pilot and The Conqueror. The eccentric plutocrat screamed his favorites over and over again. He never explained, but he refused to let them appear on TV. The Conqueror wasn't seen for decades.
You sent me to some weird Russian website, and now I'm on a list to watch this movie.
That was where I could find it. It was on a .ru site with a very weird URL. So I guess I owe both of us and our future internet security an apology, along with the many crimes of this film and Howard Hughes. I had to heap another one on there and probably totally destroying our future internet well-being.
It was worth it. With all that, should we talk a little bit about this movie as much as we can? Anyway,
Sarah, drop us in to the world of the Conqueror and Genghis Khan and Duke Wayne.
There's like this very long intro crawl that tries to explain what's going on, but there is a lot of heavy thesaurus use. There's words like wanton cruelty and rapine, and I stopped reading because I was watching all of these people ride horses through the desert and thinking about the atomic dust that we have to thank Robert Oppenheimer for. Every time I saw like a dust cloud go up, I'm like, oh my God, someone just got cancer. And I just was also thinking, how dare you make me watch this, Rena? And also, like, I was taken by the score, how John Ford ripoffy the opening was. Like, the music doesn't even try to sound like it was inspired by the part of the world that it came from. Like, they do nothing to try and set you in the world, except they have these mustaches and occasionally are wearing something that looks like it was made out of a yak. They make no effort whatsoever to root you into the culture in a way, again, that's almost a miracle. And you see them riding, and then they bump into Susan Hayward on a litter. So inappropriately. She is just wearing a white silk dress. I do love the dress, but she looks nothing like anything. Like, she looks like she said, I'll be in your movie, but I'm going to dress exactly how I want to, and I don't care if it works for the film or not.
Yes, Susan Hayward is wearing a white silky satin evening gown with strappy gold slippers, as one does in the Gobi Desert, and there is a ton of yellow face in this, but not on Susan Hayward. She's just a milky pale redhead in a tribe in the Gobi Desert, and there are those long Star Wars-esque running titles because this is about telling, not showing. The name of John Wayne's character is Temujin. A lot of horses, I would guess, got damaged making this movie.
Oh, so many animals are mistreated on the screen. I have a note here that I just wrote that said, "Are you kidding me?" in all caps. I'm not sure what I'm referring to. Maybe it's the dialogue, because he sees Susan Hayward with her new husband. I believe his name is Targati. And he says, Targatai, thank you. He says to him, I share your taste in women, Targatai, but not in blood. Farewell, Tartar woman.
He has this blood brother named Jamuka. Jamuka and Temujin have the least convincing romance I've ever seen on film. And he's referred to as silver-tongued Jamuka, but he never says anything particularly eloquent that would have earned him the name. I think there are a total of 2 actual Asian people in this film, and one is a non-speaking role. It's either yellowface or people who look vaguely non-white ethnic. There's an Italian guy playing Susan Hayward's dad later. But he then says to his thoroughly unconvincing bro, Jamuka, I feel this Tartar woman is for me. My blood says, take her.
No, he's the hero of this film, so we're all laughing as he humiliates her and rips off her dress. It's a gross start.
But before he does this, he goes back to the Mongol village that he is the leader of and says, I'm going to take this woman. You're all coming along on this raid. And nobody really makes much of an effort to quibble with him. They all think it's a fantastic idea, even though they're taking like one woman for his benefit. I can't see how this benefits the tribe in this paltry-looking village. And we meet his actual brother who bends metal for fun, and like these yurts are, the production quality is not great, and I feel like if MGM or even Fox or Paramount had made this, you'd see that old Hollywood touch and it would make it somewhat more bearable, what Howard Hughes had just done to RKO. So Howard Hughes had just bulldozed a ton of the back lot, and it says, within the very first year of taking ownership, Hughes cut 75% of the entire studio workforce, grinding down the 2,500 employees to a woeful skeleton crew of just 600. In a tumultuous period for all of Hollywood, Hughes's managerial actions raised the eyebrows of literally anyone following the saga. The method of his madness here was to save the studio by gutting the inner workings of its bloat, thus saving money by avoiding unnecessary salaries.
So RKO was the Twitter of its day?
Howard Hughes has basically gutted RKO. All the people who would have made things look good, most of them are not here, and those that are, their morale is severely reduced.
Do you think that maybe one day Elon Musk is going to buy up all the remaining copies of the Conqueror and lock himself in a room and jerk off to it until he's too weak to go on?
I sure hope so, Sarah.
Okay, just a thought. So yeah, he's going to take them all on this adventure to secure this woman who he says is his destiny. And I know I went hard for the cast of Caligula last week doing their best. But I am going to say here that everyone visibly hates each other and is very unhappy. So it's very difficult to believe that he wants anything to do with Susan Hayward except to maybe murder her. There's no feeling of a pull of destiny, probably because that wasn't really Genghis Khan's style.
No.
And it's being like a romantic lead is not something that he was known for or recognized for in his lifetime. So it's weird.
In real life, Genghis Khan and his first wife, Orte, were like 10 and 9 when they were betrothed. But also there's a scene here where Susan Hayward is talking with Targatai, and it seems like she's dissing him for not being more toxically male and picking a fight with John Wayne when he first comes over. She says something like, for less my father would have had him slain.
Also, we find out that she has married him strategically because he is a Merkin.
I think it's Merkid, but who cares?
No one was pronouncing anything correctly. I'm quite sure that it's not tartar as in tartar sauce, as John Wayne calls it throughout the film. And it's kind of astonishing to, like, at this point, you realize pretty quickly that John Wayne has done absolutely no work whatsoever to portray effectively Genghis Khan. He is talking like himself, adding like an extra layer of weirdness to all the dialogue. And he has the mustache and nothing else. He has made no effort whatsoever to do anything to embody this character. It is anti-acting.
The makeup people did make some effort at putting epicathic fold makeup on his eyes. And Susan Hayward, a lot of people's eyebrows are doing this weird up swoosh thing to try to look quote unquote Asian. Agnes Moorehead shows up as John Wayne's mother, despite Agnes Moorehead only being 7 years older than John Wayne, the same age difference between Anne Bancroft and Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate, and about the only thing these movies share in common. She's sour-faced, she's wearing yellow face, and I just wanted to shake her and say, Agnes Moorehead, you were in Citizen Kane. Although I guess this movie was a bigger box office draw than Citizen Kane was, it sounds like. Who knows?
So there's this war for her that goes, he kills off her husband and captures her, brings her back to camp, and his mother says, you will take pleasure with offspring of your father's slayer, because we find out also that Susan Hayward's dad killed Genghis Khan's dad, and he announces his intentions to kill her father to her, and he says, "Stay, my mother, there will be feasting and rejoicing."
In this dialogue, he addresses everyone by their relationship, and so my mother, my brother, they all have to remind each other of who the characters are and how they're related.
I will say that it's a very helpful technique if you're watching the movie 7 minutes at a time.
Agreed.
So they're kind of roustabouting and having a good time, and she just has this puss on her face like the kidnapped bride that she is. She says, "I do not dance for jackals," and then he says, "I take you for wife," and then attempts to assault her, which appears to be a theme of our show these days. Then she calls Jamuga to her tent to try and get with him in order to get him to rescue her and get her out of there. And then there's a bunch of people who come to try and, I guess, get her back and set the camp on fire and he rescues her and they hook up, and I don't get it. Because again, like, why does she like him now?
I don't think she likes him yet. The Mongol histories say that Genghis Khan took a woman as wives when he did marry some of these women that it says that he took as wives, but sometimes it just means that he raped them. Not just. Sometimes it's a euphemism for him raping them. And she attempts to sway Jamuga by throwing herself at him, then says that she'll cry rape if he refuses her. So, great. And this tent is hung with blankets that look like they're trying to find whatever looks vaguely ethnic.
I'm going to just note here, this is the hero of the film. We're supposed to be on his side.
And Jamuga rats out Susan Hayward to Temujin, and Temujin is like, nah, she's my woman, I'm good with this. And the exact line that he says is, "She is a woman, Jamuga, much woman. Should her perfidy be less than that of other women?"
No, I guess not.
There's that other thing where women start liking men after the man slaps them.
It's a truth, universally known that, if you slap a woman, she will fall in love with you.
Oh, yeah. So next, we go to Wang Khan City to set up another raid. There's some convoluted thing that I was unaware of any groundwork for why they do this. But Wang Khan City bears no relation to its surrounding environs, even if it's supposed to be some kind of oasis city. It's some set that they found somewhere that looks like a palace, but it doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything. And he brings out women to dance for them. And there's this one who's wearing just like silk fringe. And I figured out that the bodysuit she's wearing, I believe it's probably made from a material called silk souffle that was later banned for being flammable. But it was like silk combined with nylon. And it's what the dress that Marilyn Monroe wore to sing Happy Birthday, Mr. President, the dress that Kim Kardashian subsequently ruined at the Met Gala, was made from. So I think that's what's holding the fringe up on the fringe dance. Susan Hayward is basically negged into dancing.
That fabric was well known across the globe in 11th century Asia. So, of course, it totally makes sense that she would be wearing that. This dance scene goes on forever. It just goes on and on. Like, dancers just keep coming out. And At this point, I started to kind of check out a little bit in terms of, like, I don't care what's going on. So I started kind of just thinking about how this is the kind of art that all the left behind aggrieved white boys who complain about political correctness and representation want. This is it right here. It's a white dude being able to play whatever character he wants and put as little effort into it as possible, because that's freedom. So I was thinking about other casting disasters that we could have in that magical world, like Joe Rogan to play Martin Luther King, or The Rock to play Hitler. This is America's cowboy playing one of the most, like, rapacious monsters to ever roam the world. And they're playing it like it's all for fun. It's so weird. Susan Hayward, as you mentioned, gets nagged into getting up and dancing. She continues to look incredibly unhappy to be there. And John Wayne says something about, I think it's about the fringe dancer, says something like, all other women are like the second pressing of a grape after seeing her dance, which I guess means that all other women are used up trash bags compared to her, which felt really good to hear. I was really uncomfortable watching him kind of like make her hate dance for him. And it sounded like at this point, like they were going to gang up with their team of rivals to go after the Tartars and the Merkins.
The plot is super convoluted. In real life, Jamuka and Genghis Khan were childhood blood brothers. They were super close. Jamuka eventually did betray Genghis Khan big time, but throughout the film, it's never clear. Did Jamuka betray Genghis Khan? Is he a double agent? Is he pretending to not betray him while betraying him? It's very convoluted. We never pick up on that, and we'll get to it at the end, but it never really makes sense if you try to follow it. Susan Hayward uses her sword dance that she's nagged into as an excuse to throw a sword at John Wayne and Wang Khan. She doesn't manage to kill him. John Wayne and Wang Khan go to see Wang Khan's shaman, who talks about burning some oracle bones.
He also has an amazing line at this moment where he says, "The moment is ripe for a young Khan." And John Wayne is almost 50 years old in this movie. So I was like, or the moment is ripe for an incredibly middle-aged man who's 1950s fit to pretend that he is ready to unite all of the Mongols.
Raid, there's some burning tents. The raid goes badly for Temujin, who hides in a cave. It's another one of these things where, is Jamuka betraying him? Jamuka escapes. It says, follow, do not return without Temujin. It looks like Jamuka's leading. It don't follow whether there's a betrayal or what's going on here. And then Susan Hayward is back in her litter, and John Wayne is yoked to an ox yoke in the position of a Christ figure, humiliated. This never happened.
Oh, of course it didn't happen.
The way that they're shooting this and the way that he's like draped on the ox yoke are straight out of Jesus movies.
Yeah, it's very Passion of the Christ. Or Jesus Christ Superstar. Pick your Jesus project. He's dragging this thing along, and you get a bunch of close-up shots that really illustrate how ridiculous this mustache is on John Wayne. And then I started thinking at this point about, would Oppenheimer have been a better movie if it dealt with the fact that Robert Oppenheimer killed John Wayne?
I'm not sure. I really liked Oppenheimer.
I did too, but could it have been even more perfect if there were just like a 10-minute intercession where he tried to cope with the fact that not only did he get the atomic clock, but also killed John Wayne indirectly?
I'm not sure, Sarah. I mean, I'm not sure if Oppenheimer outlived John Wayne. Going back to this Fuster clock, Susan Hayward feels bad for Temujin all of a sudden. He's supposed to die something called the slow death, which sounds gnarly. And then I swear they repurposed a medieval tournament set for the Tartar camp. So, of course, John Wayne's guard falls asleep. So, of course, he uses the heavy thing that he's yoked to kill the measly small guard watching him. And then Susan Hayward, because she's fallen in love with him, cuts him loose, which makes no sense, and they embrace, which also makes no sense.
Like, does she not remember the part where he said he was going to kill her father?
I have no idea, Sarah. I feel like we're not doing this justice. We weren't watching it closely enough. We weren't taking more notes. We really could have unpacked this more.
Their relationship makes no sense whatsoever.
It really doesn't. I don't see when or how they fall in love. Then we see some animal abuse. I think a slave catches them, and then someone brings out a bear, and I can't tell if it's a real bear. Were they supposed to torture him with the bear? I have a note here on an accident that Susan Hayward had on set with a panther from the killing of John Wayne by Ryan Uchtdewilligen. For all of Hayward's problems with the shoot, remaining glamorous being one of them, the heat wasn't as big of a worry as it was for others. Her revealing dresses helped her skin to breathe, while for most of her outdoor scenes, she was hauled around in a shaded chariot. She had a more vicious enemy to contend with, and no, it wasn't Howard Hughes. A live panther was requested for a scene to give perhaps authenticity and a greater sense of realism to the film. Whatever the case, the tamed wildcat was delivered and placed by the actress's side. 2 accounts of the same incident have been shared over the years. In one, Hayward waved her arm in front of the panther, which decided to nip at her limb. It narrowly missed taking a chunk out of her, thanks to Hayward's quick reaction. The second account had Hayward waiting around for the cameras to roll beside her feline co-star. The panther apparently grew infatuated with a waggling feather in her costume and actually pounced. The cat was quickly wrestled off of her, and Hayward was quickly pulled to safety. Either way, it was replaced by a hand-painted statue. Also, during the shoot, the actor playing Jamuka fell off a horse and broke his jaw and lost 3 teeth and had to be rushed to the hospital for 26 stitches, but was only out of production for around 8 days. John Wayne was popping Dexedrins, and Susan Hayward was drinking to try to cope during the making of this film.
I don't blame anyone for anything that they did while making this film to get through it.
No.
So he escapes, and then a bunch of his soldiers find him, and he says, "Death does not come easy to Temujin."
I think I have the exact quote. It's worse than that. Death comes not easy to Temujin.
Oh, wow. It is worse.
Yeah, the point of his escape, the slave lady brings food in a flask of something. He hides in the reeds. He kills a guy on a horse, gets back to the tribe, finds out that they made Jamuka leader, but Jamuka swears that he did not betray him. And then Genghis Khan exhibiting, this is brilliant strategy. I don't understand. Seriously, if Genghis Khan's strategizing were really like this, I don't understand how he took over so much of the world with plans like this, because the plan that he gives to his tribe is, I will have Borte, though I and all of us go to destruction. No general ever succeeded with that plan in the world, ever.
I couldn't help but think about maybe some movies that are slightly better, like Spartacus, or even Gladiator, or Napoleon. I think Ridley Scott does this really efficiently in his movies, like the dedication to creating the battle tactics, and demonstrate what was done and how it was done. That doesn't happen here. None of this makes any sense.
No, because the whole tribe is somehow okay with this, much as they were okay at the beginning with him throwing all of their relatively meager looking compared to Wang Khan's city that popped out of the clouds and down to nowhere and somehow has like plentiful water, etc. Much like that decision to stake everything on going after this one woman, they're totally okay with this. And then it cuts to Wang Khan having a bubble bath, and the shaman is just there hanging out. And they mention that the slaves have no tongues, which must be really nice for Wang Khan. And then he puts on a kimono thing and some pearls.
It's just like Lincoln, watching how like a plan comes together. Eventually he kills Susan Hayward's dad.
But before that, there's this thing with the shaman suspects Temujin, and they send the brother who likes bending metal into Wang Khan's city along with Jamuga for some surveillance. And I guess this is why they established previously that the brother guy is crazy strong, because he bends bars on their cell, and Jamuga is able to get out and escape. But the real life brother makes a comment, "My brawn now holds me captive," because he's too brawny to get through the bars that he's bent. I noted here knife in the back, but I'm afraid it's been so long since I've seen this part of the movie that I don't remember who knifes who in the back. Jamuga has a sword fight, and I'm confused. Like, whose side is he on? Why is there this city with fountains and bubble baths when everywhere else around it is a desert? Jamuga gets shot, and I can't figure out whose side he's on at this point, and no sign of Wang Khan.
And then they win. And Susan Hayward makes a whole speech to Jamuga about how much she loves Genghis Khan, and how like into him she is, and how he's just like so captivating. And again, he's gonna kill her dad. Yes.
To elaborate on that, he has a moment, and this is something that happened, like Genghis Khan went up onto a rock and asked the great spirits of the sky. John Wayne asks the eternal spirits of the sky for success. The shaman shows up, says he rode for 2 days, and that he will open the gate himself for seizing Wang Khan's city. The shaman stabs Wang Khan. Then Temujin gets mad at the shaman and kills him. There's another sword fight. Somehow, all of Wang Khan's former citizens are okay with marching on the Tartars. Jamuga won't talk. Susan Hayward persuades Daddy, who looks absolutely nothing like her. She just wants to know that John Wayne is alive. She's in love. I don't know how this happened. And she says, "I know of him only that all of a sudden my love overwhelms my hatred." Someone says, "My brother died, traitor, die." It's very unclear. There's a horsey swarm that doesn't look at all happy for the horses. Temujin kills Susan Hayward's dad with a knife in the chest and thanks the spirits of the sky. And he tells Jamuga, "Ask any favor of me." But Jamuga refuses forgiveness for the betrayal, that it was never clear when or how or if it occurred. He refuses forgiveness and asks to die swiftly so that he can go to heaven, where his spirit can counsel and protect Temujin. And he says that he should die even though he didn't actually betray him, because now there's been a suspicion. So their bromance that was never convincing at all will not change. Sarah, anything else in there?
There's voiceover that follows all of this, like, happy ending for Genghis Khan and the start of his reign, that talks about how he and his family ruled the world for centuries, and they failed to mention the whole he killed tens of millions of people and caused untold multi-generational trauma. Again, like, it's a happy movie, and we're supposed to be on his side. It's so strange. I can't overstate how strange this movie is.
It's so weird, Sarah.
No one seems to have made any effort whatsoever to act in this film, except Lee Van Cleef. He's having a great time.
There's a picture of the poster for this film where the tagline on it, there's this gorgeous picture of John Wayne and Susan Hayward, where it says, "I am Temujin, barbarian, I fight." I love, I conquer, ... like a barbarian.
It's so weird. It's all just so weird.
This movie is insane.
Should we try and rate this?
I guess we should. I felt like we were going to need much longer to get through all this, but there was so little that, like, stuck in a way that I could explain any of the plot at all.
It's such a strange capsule of people not trying to do anything with any accuracy. And it's also like, you know how when my example of this is going to be Pulp Fiction. When Pulp Fiction came out, there were a whole bunch of movies that followed in the next couple of years that kind of looked like Pulp Fiction and drew all the beats from it. And it felt like a photocopy that wasn't quite right. Like, this feels like a photocopy of a John Ford movie. It's trying to follow the beats of a John Ford movie, but they're saying, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we elevated a genocidal leader to hero status and then put Western movie music underneath it and also had a beautiful love interest? It's just so strange.
I don't think Genghis Khan was killing the Chinese people because he wanted to rid the world of Chinese people. I think they were just in the way.
Yeah.
One of the few saving graces of the Mongols was that they didn't care what religion you were, so long as you capitulated immediately and unconditionally. You could go on following your god by your rules, so long as you surrendered the minute they showed up or sent word. So for outward appearances, hair, and makeup, I gave it a 1.
I gave it a 1.5 just because I want to reserve the right to use the 1. I'm scared to use the 1, although this is pretty basement. I thought that Susan Hayward looked really pretty, and the 0.5 is for the accuracy of the mustaches. Otherwise, as you've mentioned, everyone looks terrible. There is yellow face and brown face all over the place. I kind of had the theory that they didn't cast Asian actors because it would have made everyone else look more ridiculous, that there was a method to that madness.
At the time, they wouldn't have been casting Mongolians. They would have probably cast Chinese and Japanese. And that would have been massive diversity casting in a film that's supposed to be about Asian people anyway. And yeah, they actually brought in Native Americans on the horses to play Mongols in the horse raid scenes, 300 or so. For acting and casting, I gave it a 2.
All right. I gave it a 1.5. I kept wondering when I was watching this too, like, I've obviously seen the landmark John Wayne movies that you get assigned to see in film class. I have not sought out much of his other entertainment. Like, does he even enjoy the craft of acting? Like, does he want to do this? Did he ever want to do this? Like, everything I've seen him in, not just this, like, he has just released like a giant sigh of annoyance just before the camera starts rolling in everything that I've seen him in. Susan Hayward is so visibly unhappy and doesn't look like someone who should be cast as someone named Bortai. I did give that 0.5 to Lee Van Cleef because he looked like he was having a good time. He didn't care. No one is correctly cast in this film, however, and no one is good.
I've read people who said that they think Agnes Moorehead looks like she was having a good time. I didn't quite grasp that. You get that. She was getting a paycheck, I guess. I stand behind that score. The movie is called The Conqueror, but he doesn't actually conquer anything. His strategy is terrible and based on that he wants this woman where it seems like they hate each other at first and has no basis for thinking this Tartar woman is for me. He goes back and conquers these tribes that he's been squabbling with to begin with, but he hasn't quite conquered. He isn't quite a conqueror yet in a film they call the Conqueror. Actually, he's defeated a number of times, which leads to him walking around on an ox yoke, being lit and filmed like a Christ figure.
A weird choice. I mean, it's kind of like The Conqueror Begins, to bring up Christopher Nolan's work another time in this podcast today. It's an origin story for sure. But again, why call it The Conqueror? Why not call it Genghis Begins? Why make this movie? Why have it? Why does it have to be here?
For passage of time, I gave it a 1. It's unclear to me how much time is passing, or whether it's a few days, or whether there are lapses in between, how long it takes to get between places.
Same. It could have been a week, could have been a month, could have been 5 years. Who knows? Who knows how long any of this took?
This was also supposed to be for how well they aged the characters, but that's unclear. You couldn't make John Wayne look like a teenager, which is about how old Genghis Khan was when Bortai was taken in the big raid that set him on his path. For costuming, I gave it a 3.
Same. I will acknowledge that they seem to find a lot of appropriate fur, but there was also a lot of lycra spandex-esque fabric in the dance scenes that obviously would never have found a way in.
And the costumes were just unimpressive, and it all makes sense now, knowing the severe cuts that RKO was dealing with, especially when you know what the production quality was in that era. There are people wearing helmets with peculiar feathers on them. It doesn't, none of the costuming choices make sense. Agnes Moorehead has these hat bells, and I don't know what effort was made toward what they looked at, what they were trying to imitate. So for costuming, it's a 3. For quality of the script, I gave it a 1.
Same. It's terrible. It is terrible. It doesn't even seem like they have like that Oscar Millard had even like a passing acquaintance with who Genghis Khan was. It's tonally so bizarre and fucked up. And it like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure has more of a grasp on who Genghis Khan was than this movie that is supposed to be about his life.
One bit of trivia that I found was that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was the first time that an Asian person was ever cast as Genghis Khan.
Of course it was.
Okay, so script, we gave it a 1. Accuracy, I gave it a 2. And the reason it earned a 2 was because I read the synopsis of the Omar Sharif version, and that was even worse.
So what?
The Omar Sharif Genghis Khan movie has Jamuka and Genghis Khan fighting over Bortai, and he invades China at a point where he had never yet invaded China. So I realized that at least this stuck to a raid that happened early in Genghis Khan's career, where his woman got taken and he got her back, even though none of the other details go into that. Realizing that the Sharif version was worse, I had to give this a 2, but truly the only way either of these movies could be less accurate would be if they had a dinosaur show up and interact with the humans, because there were dinosaurs at one point in the Gobi Desert. And for that, I propose a new rule that if any film that we do in the future has a dinosaur show up and interact with humans, it automatically gets a 0 for accuracy.
Fair. But what if it's about the creation of the world?
That took place over billions of years, and there are no dinosaurs in the Bible.
5,000 years ago, I think, actually.
Oh, right. Just like the creation museums say.
Yeah. And those folks were riding on dinosaurs.
Sure. Jesus held a baby dinosaur. There's pictures of it on the internet.
A baby dinosaur threw rocks at him while he walked through the streets tied to his cross.
And that's why God made the dinosaurs go extinct.
Exactly. Exactly. For accuracy, I gave it a 1.5. I know they didn't have the internet in the 1950s, but like, did anyone read a book, read a paragraph? This movie makes no pretense whatsoever of trying to like attach itself in any way to the culture or the time period. And I'm going to say something here that might lead you to believe I'm going to try and be nice to this movie in some way, and I'm not. I don't mean it as a compliment. But I do weirdly admire art that, creators who do not let realism or dedication to like adherence to facts of the way things happen get in the way of their product. It's fun. I mentioned to you that it feels like a piece of outsider art, like art that's created by children or people in insane asylums, like Marat Sade, where someone is just like, you know what, I'm going to make this thing and this is what it's going to have. And I don't care how people respond to it. And I don't even know how they'll respond to it, but I think it's art. So in a weird way, like I admire anyone who can just kind of be like, I'm going to skip over these details because they're not in line with what I want to happen in this. And I'm still going to say that it is a biopic. There's something about that that's really like speaks of like a confidence. I admire it because I'm really like, I get really sucked into like wanting things to be accurate, and it's a downfall. But this movie does not.
No, and normally in a biopic where accuracy is sacrificed, it's for better story flow. And as we've said, it may pick up points on storytelling, but this did not, because the story was so convoluted that they have the resources. How did he get this information on when and where and how to do the raid? Why, if his father Yesugai and Wang Kong were such best buds, is Wang Kong in this amazing city and they're in this like yurt place where someone falls into their water source that looks like a puddle? So the storytelling, I gave my first 0.
Damn, girl. I gave it a 1. I was taken by like, as you mentioned, he does no actual conquering in this film, which would have been an effective storytelling tool. And also there's nothing interesting or inventive or propulsive about, focusing on that time period. Like it's not used in a way to illustrate anything, like because this movie doesn't care about Genghis Khan's inner life and none of the actors care about showing any sort of like motivating factors. And there's plenty of movies out there like Jobs, Lincoln, which I've mentioned already, Social Network, Being the Ricardos, that do a good job of focusing on a really tight period of time, but also manage to show like a fully fleshed out story about someone's life and what makes them compelling and relevant. And this does none of that. Like it doesn't use any sort of storytelling to illustrate why we should care about this person. And it's garbage. This movie is not like any of those movies I just named.
And normally, I think I've said that it helps a biopic if it tightens the focus to one period in a person's life. Like I've always felt that Chaplin would have been a better film if they had not attempted to tell his whole life and had just focused in on the ensemble at the beginning with Max Sennett, and then like his first, like that would have been a more effective bit of storytelling, and that's often more effective. That was one of the things that made Oppenheimer effective, was how it like crosses over the beginning and it gives very brief shift to the beginning of the end. It kind of shifts time, but it narrows the focus, and normally that makes for a more effective story. But in this case, focusing in on the raids around Bortai, nothing made sense anyway.
Yeah, it still felt very sloppy. It's not as and then-y as The Doors, but it is kind of like and then no one learns anything, no one grows, no one changes, no one like gets anything out of it. Like stuff just keeps happening.
Muka chooses to die for like no good reason when Temujin and Bortai are all Yeah, we love you, like, be my blood brother and blood brother-in-law, we're great together, and this makes zero sense, along with how opaque it is as to whether or not he betrayed him. I think one of the synopses that I read said that he didn't. So storytelling, 0 from me. Production value, I gave it a 3 because I felt sorry for all the poor horses.
I similarly 4 for production value. You see what money there is on the screen, but there's not a lot of it. And I don't know how much the deserts of Utah resemble Mongolia or Asia. I'm gonna guess they don't, but they did go there and shot downwind of a nuclear testing site. Dedication to making it look like it was set in Utah. I'll give it that.
Well, I think that one of the people prominently involved in the film had flown over the Gobi Desert in World War II.
Oh, cool.
So he had some comparison basis.
Cool. I guess there were lots of palaces with fountains there, too.
Must have seen those from overhead. Option and production decisions. The one that we used to replace Ego Surrender, because instead of being a place to penalize people for doing their own singing in biopics, it became a way to give actors extra brownie points for showing up to work, which falls under acting casting.
Sorry.
And it's not a thing that some of the most overcompensated and spoiled people in the world deserve extra points for, Sarah.
For what it's worth, I would have given this a 1 in Ego Surrender.
So for direction, production decisions, I gave it a 1.
I gave it a 1.5. Again, just reserving the right for something more horrible to come along, I guess. But none of this film should exist. It shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be watching it. Like, none of it should have happened. And also, like, they shipped radioactive dirt around the country. Like, no one made, like, no good. I can't think of a movie off the top of my head where I can say that no one made any good decisions of any kind in this movie. It just shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be talking about it. Like, we should be in a world where this movie doesn't exist.
Well, Sarah, I can't think of any other movie where you can say this film causes cancer and it's not hyperbole. It doesn't, I did not, so far as I know, get cancer from watching it. But if you were there at the time of the filming and you were involved in any way, it would not have been hyperbolic to say this movie causes cancer. Had anyone had a thought that filming downwind from a nuclear test site was going to give them cancer.
Can you imagine dying for this movie?
Something that we can go back into later. The actors who died for this movie.
They got cancer for making this movie.
Yeah.
It's so awful.
For Do We Care, I gave it a 0.
Same, girl.
Did you decide to use the buy?
No.
Okay, you're saving that buy for something.
Saving that buy for something. 0 for this. It's so, I will say it again, it is so tonally weird. Genghis Khan was objectively a terrible human being. He caused untold misery. He raped everyone to the point where there's a significant portion of the population on the planet Earth can trace their lineage back to Genghis Khan. But this movie treats him like he is a white hat in a Western. I'm not saying like that you can't make a movie about a complicated, terrible human being, but don't make it feel like Pride of the Yankees, which is what this feels like. And don't make it a celebration of a monster's life. Like, this should feel like Downfall or The Act of Killing or Missing. And it feels like The Doors. Like, it feels like Dick Powell's like, hey, look, he's kind of cool. He's not cool. He's a bad person.
My average came to 1.4. I did not use the buy.
1.5 is my average.
Ladies and gentlemen, 1.45. It scored. Did this movie deserve to score lower than Caligula, Sarah?
Oh, it did. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I I know I was very kind to the performers of Caligula. And I felt sympathy for them. I don't feel like anyone was doing anything except trying to get through the day here. Like, I didn't feel like there was any sort of interest in in performing well, or in, like trying to establish anything of any kind. This was trash. This was just trash. It was nuclear trash. No one should watch it. Do not go to the Russian website to watch it. Don't watch this movie.
It does, if you're interested in the Mongols, you'll have to pay for it at this point because it's been 10 years, but Dan Carlin's podcasts on the Mongols were good.
Watch Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. That is a better history lesson than this film.
1.45, baby.
Oh.
Okay, so choice dialogue, Sarah?
We hit on a lot of it, and a lot of it, the dialogue is just by nature ridiculous because of John Wayne's leaden delivery of it. But the one line that stuck out to me was, "You didn't suckle me to be slain by Tartars," which is what he said to his mother when he returned victorious after being captured.
His mother, who he always reminds himself and us is his mother by addressing her as my mother every time he sees her. This is something Susan Hayward says. The Conqueror, mighty armies cannot stop him, but one touch of my lips. Yes, he captured me, but he cannot tame me.
Ew.
Or in a scene where he is surrounded by his enemies. I'm getting this from IMDb just because there's so much going on here in this terrible, terrible script. Temujin says, "Come and take me, mongrels, if you dare, while I have fingers to grasp a sword and eyes to see your cowardly faces. Your treacherous heads will not be safe on your shoulders, for I am Temujin the Conqueror. No prison can hold me, no army defeat me."
Except cancer, radiation.
There's this interchange he has with his mother, Agnes Moorehead. "She will bring woe to you and your people, my son. A woman made wife against her will can be a dangerous foe." And he replies, "For good or ill, she is my destiny." No reason for him to have had this reaction to her.
Oh, I feel gross.
Sarah, this film qualified for a second opinion.
Oh, second opinion.
We get to do second opinion, the element that we blatantly ripped off from How Did This Get Made? I found the only 10-star written review on IMDb, which was written in April of 2008 by Mercury411. 10 out of 10. Don't knock it until you've seen it. I'm probably not part of the majority here, but I think this is a good movie. A lot of people are probably knocking it before they've seen it because John Wayne plays Temujin. As the story goes, John Wayne wanted the role and was very serious about it. He found the script in Dick Powell's office. I'm sure Powell had his reasons for wanting to throw the script out, but it can't be that it was that horrible of a script. The script is actually pretty decent. I can't complain about the makeup either because I think that was very well done too. John Wayne, between makeup and his hair, really looks Asian in this. People that criticize this movie keep pointing out the nationalities of everyone involved. If you are going to do that, then you are just nitpicking. Yes, John Wayne is a white man playing a Mongol, but you couldn't have expected them to cast a real Mongol in the role. Whites played Orientals and Native Americans. At least he said Native Americans. I am so sorry. I apologize to the Asian community and the Asian American community. Anthony Quinn, who is of Mexican and Irish descent. Is Anthony Quinn even still alive in 2008? Or was Anthony Quinn even still alive in 2008? I don't know. I've got to stop. Okay. Anthony Quinn, who is of Mexican and Irish descent, played Attila the Hun once. Omar Sharif once played Genghis Khan. Stephen Boyd played Khan's brother Damuka. The Sharif and Boyd movie was horrible, by the way. The Conqueror is way better than that. The Conqueror is more accurate, too. You're probably going to wonder why John Wayne. I said the same exact thing, and I thought the movie was silly at first. But I sat down and watched it, and I thought it was good. The Conqueror's opening is great. It opens with Temujin riding through the desert with his Mongol army. The scenes of the army riding are great. They are shot so well. The action scenes of the Mongols fighting enemy armies were great too. If you want action, this has plenty of it. Another nice touch was the love story between Temujin and Vortai. Vortai is played by Susan Hayward. She was pretty decent in her role. I enjoyed her scenes with John Wayne. I also enjoyed Pedro Armendariz in his scenes with John Wayne. Armendariz was also decent in his role as Jamuka, Temujin's blood brother. A previous reviewer said that John Wayne and Pedro Armendariz are not believable as brothers. Keep in mind, the movie never says they are brothers, but they keep stressing blood brothers. Overall, I think The Conqueror was a pretty good movie. It pushed all the right buttons for me. I enjoyed it very much. The Conqueror is a well-made movie, great cinematography, decent writing, great costumes, and great makeup. I thought the score by Victor Young was great too. I especially loved the romantic theme that Young uses throughout the movie. That was very memorable. If you ever get a chance, see this movie. If you are interested in the subject matter, check it out. If you are a fan of the old-time classics or those Hollywood epics, check it out. If you are a fan of John Wayne and you want to see him in a different role for a change, check it out. John Wayne won't disappoint you. The Conqueror and John Wayne are not bad at all. Don't knock this movie until you've seen it. People were way too harsh when they placed their votes on IMDb. I'll bet that some people gave this movie a 1 without ever seeing it. All they saw was John Wayne's name in the credits. No, we gave it a 1.45 and we did see it. And since this is the internet and you're a strawman and can't fight back, I am right and you are wrong. Go to jail where you belong. You are so wrong. So wrong. You are just drowning in wrongness and owe an apology to the human race for praising this movie. Dunderhead. I loathe you. God, doesn't it just feel good to beat up on a wrong person and have no blowback for it?
I mean, yes, but I'm surprised personally that this individual gave it a 10-star review to begin with, because there's a lot of qualifying language throughout this review to try and kind of justify their position.
That sounds more like an 8 or 7.5 review, but that is part of why we have the scoring system, so that we have a way of doing things where we're not constantly giving 7.5s to be nice, and where 7 and 8 mean nothing because you're afraid to give a 4 or 5. But a 10 should be something you give out maybe twice a year, tops, for a film that goes into your list of your favorite movies.
If this is a 10, the bar is low in Mercury 411's house. Anthony Quinn playing Attila the Hun and Omar Sharif also playing Genghis Khan does not justify the existence of a John Wayne film in which he plays Genghis Khan. We shouldn't be making movies about Genghis Khan. He's garbage. And that's that. Like, that doesn't mean that we should have this. I strong disagree with this review.
Yeah.
But that's what makes America so fabulous, is that we can disagree on really important stuff like this.
It was hard to find that review. There was like one 10 out of 10 review.
This is from like the dawn of the internet.
Do we have anything else to say about The Conqueror?
I mean, I have so many other things to say, but really that it all comes down to this shouldn't exist. This movie is a trash fire. I'm angry and flummoxed, and also, as I said, grudgingly respectful of the fact that they don't get caught up with facts, because that's brave. It's brave to not care about the facts or let the facts get in the way of the story you want to tell.
Talk more about how this movie caused cancer.
Is there more to say about that?
In the killing of John Wayne, just to get more, when it wasn't the heat or misbehaving mammals at fault, it was the sand. A constant wind seemed to whip through the canyon, stirring up dust in all sorts of hazy directions, a problem that stopped production on several occasions. Being a film set and all, control was preferred, so to strike up the right dramatic effect and keep with consistency on the odd day the wind kept still, giant fans were brought in to blow the sand around in bigger clouds, the radioactive sand. On days requiring stampeding horses, a logistical headache unto itself while the dust got so unbearably kicked up. Dick Powell's directions were often muffled through a surgical mask to keep the particles at bay. All that grit and grime stuck around too. It was in the actors' costumes, woven into their hair, taken into their lungs after every breath. Local restaurateur Dick Hammer came to the catering rescue with Crew 55 and his stainless steel kitchen on wheels to serve hundreds of hot lunches. What he and everyone else failed to account for was the healthy topping of sand that coated each of their outdoor ingested meals. June Allison said it was referred to on set as Utah chili powder. Everyone, the actors especially, had to be hosed down at the end of the day to keep the sand out, and working showers were even set up to help keep the crew clean.
Oh my God, this is like listening to like the opening of a disaster movie. I'm so angry listening to all of these stories about the nuclear dust.
Yeah, again, the heat was like 100 degrees while they were filming.
I mean, it's a visibly miserable looking shoot. When you're watching it, you see like all of this dust spinning around, and it looks like it was a really unpleasant experience.
Yes, and here is what Lee Van Cleef had to say to Munn about all the things that caused cancer on the shoot. It turns out that a lot of the radioactive dust blew into that canyon, and I remember that a lot of the actors, extras, and crew got covered in that dust. We had to have our mouths and eyes cleaned out with water. We were covered in it. There were more than 200 people working on that picture, and around half of them came down with cancer. Wayne had lung cancer and then stomach cancer. Susan Hayward had a brain tumor as well as cancer of the skin, uterus, and breast. Pedro Armendariz had cancer of the kidneys and larynx. Agnes Moore had died from uterine cancer, and Dick Powell died from lung cancer.
It's awful.
I'm having fun hating on this movie with you, but we should probably wrap it up.
I want to just thank everyone for listening and going on this journey with us today. And give us a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you listen. It's supposed to be very helpful. And don't watch this movie. Don't seek it out. Do not indulge the existence of this film.
This movie, I can't say I found it more watchable than Caligula, because I did stop here and there and paused it to take notes. But it is really something to sit through. I'm glad that we did it, because we have a standard for a low rating. We have our 1.45. There might be things out there that will get a 0, but now we know what we're looking for in the dawn of this podcast when looking for a standard of awfulness. I wasn't necessarily bored, but that wasn't for good reasons.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, and on that note, join us again next time when we will surely be watching something that isn't as terrible as this film.
Episode 6 is Milk, which is one of my favorites.
Oh,
and I believe
Milk.
I haven't watched it in years, but Milk will be the first movie we've watched where all the sex is consensual.
What?
I know.
Oh, I can't wait to watch a movie where no one's being raped. On that note, thanks for joining Biopic, a podcast story.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.